My teenage son's girlfriend asked, "Why does your grandpa keep buying me expensive gifts when you're not around?" I looked up from the insurance claim I was reviewing, pen frozen halfway through a signature. My 16-year-old son Caleb was at soccer practice, which meant Olivia had come to our house specifically when he wasn't here. She stood in the doorway of my home office, her backpack still on, holding a small velvet box with the kind of careful reverence you give to something expensive and confusing. The afternoon light through the window caught the nervous sweat on her forehead. Her hands were shaking slightly. "What gifts?" I asked, setting down my pen slowly. My father lived in Arizona and had severe mobility issues. He'd never met Olivia, had never even video called with Caleb's girlfriend. The last time Dad traveled anywhere was 3 years ago for my mother's funeral, and even that had required a medical transport team. Olivia opened the box to reveal a delicate necklace with a pendant that looked like genuine sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. The craftsmanship was exceptional. The metal was clearly real gold. My throat tightened as I estimated the value, easily $3,000 to $4,000. "Your grandfather gave me this yesterday when I stopped by to drop off Caleb's hoodie he left at my house." She said it so casually, like receiving expensive jewelry from someone's grandfather was normal teenage behavior. "He said you'd been working too hard lately, and he wanted to do something nice for your son's girlfriend, since you were too stressed to notice the little things." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up in that primal warning way your body has of recognizing danger before your conscious mind catches up. Every word she'd just said was wrong. "Olivia, my father hasn't left Arizona in 3 years. He has severe arthritis and uses a wheelchair. He can barely make it to his mailbox. I've never even shown him a picture of you. He doesn't know what you look like or that Caleb has a girlfriend." Her face went pale in that way that happens when someone realizes they've been lied to about something fundamental, something they'd accepted as truth. The color drained from her cheeks, and her grip on the jewelry box tightened until her knuckles went white. "But he knew everything," she whispered. "He knew about Caleb's ACL injury last season. He knew you work in insurance claims for Meridian Associates. He knew I had my scholarship interview at Northwestern coming up next month. He even knew that I take AP chemistry with Mrs. Kowalski and that I've been stressed about the upcoming exam." My hands went cold, that sensation of ice water in your veins. Someone had been watching our family closely enough to gather intimate details about our daily lives. Someone who knew our schedules, our routines, our conversations well enough to impersonate my father convincingly. Someone who'd done enough research to answer questions and build credibility. Someone who knew exactly when to approach Olivia so that neither Caleb nor I would be present to question the interaction. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, standing up from my desk chair. The leather creaked, and the sound seemed too loud in the sudden heavy silence. My voice came out calmer than I felt, years of handling insurance claims teaching me to maintain composure during crisis, but my heart was hammering against my ribs hard enough that I could feel my pulse in my throat. "About 5 months," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe longer. It started small, really small. He bought me coffee once when I was studying at that cafe near school. You know, the one on 4th Street with the good Wi-Fi? Said he was Caleb's grandfather and that he'd seen me in family photos you'd shown him. He knew details about our family that made it believable. Then he started showing up places I went. The bookstore where I buy used textbooks. The Target where I work part-time. Once outside my therapy appointment on Wednesday afternoons. 5 months. This had been happening for 5 months while I'd been completely oblivious, while Caleb had apparently accepted it as normal, while this predator had been systematically building a relationship with my son's girlfriend. The rage started building in my chest, hot and tight, but I forced it down. Olivia needed me calm and focused, not reactive. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and started scrolling through photos, each swipe revealing another piece of evidence I'd never seen. A designer purse that must have cost $1,500, still with the tags attached in the photo. Expensive wireless headphones still in their original packaging. Gift cards to Sephora and Ulta, $50 each, at least a dozen of them fanned out like playing cards. Concert tickets to shows I'd heard her mention wanting to see but never being able to afford. Front row seats that sold for $300 minimum. An Apple Watch still in its box. Clothes from stores I knew her family's budget couldn't touch. Each photo was dated, a chronicle of escalating gifts over months. "I kept asking Caleb about it," she continued, her voice shaking now, words tumbling out faster as if she'd been holding them back for too long. "He said his grandfather was just really generous and liked me, that your family had money from some inheritance, and this was normal for you guys. He said his grandpa wanted to make sure I had nice things because I was special to him, to the family." I thought maybe it was weird, but Caleb seemed so happy about it, so proud that his grandpa approved of me. I didn't want to seem ungrateful or suspicious. I felt sick, physically nauseous in a way I hadn't experienced since the day my divorce was finalized. Someone had convinced my son to explain away predatory behavior as family generosity. Someone had used my name, my father's identity, the weight of family approval to gain access to a teenage girl and systematically isolate her from questioning adults. This was textbook grooming, the kind of thing I'd sat through presentations about at Caleb's school, nodding along and thinking it would never happen to my family because I was vigilant, because I paid attention, because I was involved. And yet here we were. "Olivia, I need you to describe this man. Everything you can remember. Every detail, no matter how small. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app, my hands steadier than they should have been. My insurance work had trained me for this. Documentation, details, building a case from fragments. She closed her eyes and I watched her hands tremble as she forced herself to recall details she'd probably tried not to think too hard about. Maybe 60 years old, but fit for his age. Not old looking. Gray hair, always really well styled, like he'd just come from a salon. Wears expensive suits even when it's casual, like going to the bookstore. Italian shoes, I think. Designer. Drives a silver Mercedes, one of the big ones. S-Class, maybe? He has this really distinctive watch, gold with a black face and diamonds around the edge. And his voice is really deep, like radio announcer deep. Smooth. He always smells like expensive cologne, kind of woody. My stomach dropped through the floor and kept falling. The room tilted slightly and I had to grip the edge of my desk to stay steady. I knew that watch, a Rolex day date worth $40,000. I knew that Mercedes, a custom S560 with a vanity plate. I knew that cologne, Tom Ford Oud Wood, $300 a bottle. I knew that voice because I'd heard it every week for the past 8 years, at family dinners and holidays and school events, until 9 months ago when everything had imploded in the most spectacular way possible. The man buying gifts for my teenage son's girlfriend wasn't my father. It was my former father-in-law, Gerald Whitmore. Gerald, whose daughter Rebecca I'd divorced 10 months ago after discovering she'd been having an affair with her personal trainer for over 18 months. Gerald, who'd stood in this same office 7 months ago and threatened to destroy my career and my relationship with Caleb if I didn't agree to give Rebecca full custody and a financial settlement that would have bankrupted me and cost me my son. Gerald, who told me during our last face-to-face conversation that I'd stolen his daughter's happiness by being an inadequate husband, that I was a failure as a man and a father, and that I'd live to regret choosing my pride over family peace. Gerald, who'd shown up at my office building 6 months ago and been escorted out by security after screaming threats in the lobby about ruining my life. Gerald, who owned Whitmore Security Solutions, one of the largest private security firms in the state, with access to surveillance equipment, private investigators, and every tool necessary to track someone's movements without their knowledge. Gerald, who had the resources and the vindictiveness and apparently the complete lack of moral boundaries to target a teenage girl as revenge against me. "That's not my father," I said quietly, each word feeling like broken glass in my throat. "That's my ex-wife's father, Gerald Whitmore, and he's been pretending to be someone else to get close to you." Olivia's face went from pale to greenish, the color you turn right before you're going to be sick. She swayed slightly, and I moved quickly to guide her to the chair across from my desk. Why would he do that? Her voice was small, childlike in a way that reminded me she was still just 16, despite her mature demeanor. "What does he want from me?" "Because he wants to hurt me," I said, the pieces clicking into place with horrible, crystal-clear clarity. The divorce had been ugly, but I'd won. I'd gotten primary custody of Caleb because Rebecca's affair partner had moved into her apartment while we were still technically married, and the judge hadn't looked kindly on that. I'd kept the house because I'd bought it before the marriage with money from my parents. I'd refused Gerald's settlement demands and his threats, had stood my ground even when he'd promised to make my life hell. And now he'd found the perfect way to do it. Not by coming after me directly where I could defend myself, but by targeting someone vulnerable. Someone young. Someone connected to my son. Someone who couldn't possibly understand what was really happening until it was too late. "Have you ever been alone with him in a private place?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Has he ever asked you to go somewhere isolated? Has he ever touched you inappropriately?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head rapidly. "Last week he invited me to his lake house. Said it would be a nice surprise for Caleb, that we could take photos there for homecoming. He said you knew about it and had approved it, that it was going to be a family weekend. He was really insistent, kept texting me about it. When I hesitated, he sent me pictures of the place, said there was a boat and we could go swimming. My blood turned to ice in my veins. Gerald didn't have a lake house, but I knew exactly what property he was talking about. He had a cabin 2 hours north in the mountains, completely isolated, no cell service, no neighbors for miles in any direction. The kind of place he used for corporate retreats and private meetings. The kind of place where a 16-year-old girl could scream and no one would ever hear. The kind of place where something terrible could happen and there would be no witnesses, no evidence, no way to prove anything afterward. "Did you go?" I forced myself to ask the question, even though I was terrified of the answer. "Please tell me you didn't go." "No," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks now. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it, but something in my gut told me not to. He kept saying how mature I was for my age, how I was so much more sophisticated than other girls in my class, how I was basically an adult already. He said I could invite a friend if I wanted, but that it might be more special if it was just the two of us first, to really bond. It felt creepy when he said it like that, but I couldn't explain why. I thought maybe I was being paranoid or ungrateful. "That's your instincts trying to protect you," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. Those feelings were right. Everything you're describing is textbook grooming behavior. The gifts create a sense of obligation. The compliments about maturity are designed to make you feel special and separate you from your peer group. The isolated location removes any possibility of rescue or intervention. Olivia, I need you to understand this clearly. You were being set up for something very bad. She started crying harder, the kind of tears that come from realizing you've been in danger without fully understanding it until after the fact. The kind of tears that mix fear with relief, with shame, with anger. I'm so stupid. How did I not see it? How did I let this happen? You're not stupid, I said firmly, moving around the desk to crouch beside her chair so we were at eye level. You're 16 years old, and you were being manipulated by someone who's probably been doing this for decades. He's a predator who spent months studying you, learning your routines, figuring out what gifts would appeal to you, discovering what compliments would work. He used detailed information about our family to build credibility and trust. He gave you expensive gifts to create a sense of debt and obligation. He isolated you by convincing you this was normal and approved by adults in your life. This is what predators do, Olivia. They're good at it because they've had practice, because they're calculated and patient and they understand human psychology. This is not your fault. She nodded, but I could see the guilt and shame still written across her face. That would take time to process, probably years of therapy. But right now, we needed to focus on documentation and involving law enforcement before Gerald realized his plan had been exposed. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer first. David Reyes had handled my divorce and had warned me that Gerald was the type to retaliate. I should have listened more carefully, should have prepared better, should have warned Caleb and made sure Olivia knew what my actual father looked like. The call went to voicemail. David, it's Nathan Cross. I need you to call me back immediately. Gerald Whitmore has been impersonating my father and grooming my son's 16-year-old girlfriend for the past 5 months. We need to involve police and I need legal guidance on how to proceed. This is urgent. Call me back now. I hung up and immediately dialed 911. The operator answered on the second ring. What's your emergency? I need to report a case of child predation and identity fraud. A man has been impersonating my father and grooming a 16-year-old girl with gifts and inappropriate contact for 5 months. We have evidence and the minor victim is with me now. I'll send officers to your location. Can you confirm the child is safe and not in immediate danger? Yes, she's here with me. The perpetrator is not present. But I believe he's planning to escalate and we need to act quickly. The operator took our address and said officers would arrive within 15 minutes. I hung up and turned back to Olivia. I need you to show me every text message, every call, every interaction you've had with Gerald. Everything. Don't delete anything. It's all evidence. She nodded and pulled up her text messages with shaking hands. The contact was saved as Caleb's grandpa, with a photo that I now recognized as Gerald from about 10 years ago, before I'd ever met him. The messages made my skin crawl as I read them, each one carefully calculated to build intimacy while maintaining plausible deniability. So proud of you for acing that chemistry test. You're going to do amazing things, sweetheart. I saw you at Target yesterday during your shift. That uniform looks so professional on you. You carry yourself with such grace and maturity. Can't wait to see you again soon. Our talks mean so much to me. You remind me of my daughter when she was your age, before life made her bitter. The manipulation was sophisticated. Compliments paired with words like sweetheart that created inappropriate intimacy. References to seeing her at work that established surveillance. Comparisons to his daughter that created a false sense of family connection. And threading through it all, this implication that their relationship was special, meaningful, something that existed separate from Caleb or me. Let's keep our friendship between us for now. One message read from 3 months ago. Your boyfriend's father is under a lot of stress, and I don't want to burden him with small things. Plus, there's something nice about having our own connection, don't you think? Some things are more special when they're private. Classic isolation tactics, creating secrecy, separating the victim from potential protectors, making her complicit in hiding the relationship. I screenshot every single message, my jaw clenching tighter with each one. The timestamps showed contact at all hours, early morning texts saying good morning beautiful, late night messages saying sweet dreams princess. The frequency increased over time, from once a week initially to multiple times per day now. The progression showed escalation, patience, planning. How did he get your number? I asked. Caleb gave it to him, she said quietly. About 6 months ago. Said his grandpa wanted to be able to reach me in case of emergency, or if he needed to get messages to Caleb when Caleb's phone was dead. It seemed reasonable at the time. Of course it did. Gerald had used my son as an unwitting accomplice, had manipulated Caleb into providing access to Olivia's contact information under the guise of family safety and convenience. Every piece of this had been planned, calculated, executed with precision. Did Gerald ever ask you for photos? Specific kinds of photos? Her face went red with shame and she looked down at her hands. Once, about a month ago. He said he wanted to show his friends at the country club how beautiful Caleb's girlfriend was, how proud he was of our relationship. He asked if I had any modeling photos or professional shots. I sent him a few from my Instagram, the ones from junior prom and from the beach last summer. Just regular photos. Nothing weird. Can you show me exactly which photos you sent? She pulled them up. They were innocent photos in isolation. Her in a prom dress, her at the beach in a one-piece swimsuit, her at a school event in casual clothes. but I could see what Gerald would have seen in them. A teenage girl in formal wear, a teenage girl in a swimsuit, material that could be saved, cataloged, potentially used or distributed. The thought made me want to vomit. Did he respond to these photos? What did he say? He said I was beautiful, that I photographed like a professional model, that I should consider doing catalog work because I had the perfect look. She paused, and her voice got smaller. Then he said, if I was ever interested, he knew a photographer who did professional portfolio shoots for girls looking to get into modeling. He could set it up for me, pay for it as an early graduation gift, said it would help with college applications to have professional experience. I felt rage burning through my chest, hot and poisonous. Gerald didn't know any modeling photographers, but he absolutely knew photographers who took exploitative images of young girls, who operated in legal gray areas, who could be hired to create content that looked professional, but was really just soft-core exploitation. This had been building toward something much worse than I'd initially thought. Before I could ask another question, there was a knock on the front door. I looked through the window and saw 2 patrol officers on the porch. I let them in, introducing myself and quickly explaining the situation. Officers Martinez and Thompson looked young, but competent. Officer Martinez, a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes, took the lead. She introduced herself to Olivia with a gentle manner that immediately put the girl more at ease. I'm going to need to take your statement, but I want you to know you're not in trouble. You're the victim here, and we're going to do everything we can to protect you. Is it okay if we sit down and go through everything that happened? Olivia nodded, and we moved to the living room. For the next 90 minutes, she went through the entire story again in excruciating detail. Officer Martinez took careful notes, while Officer Thompson documented the gifts Olivia had brought with her, the necklace, photos of the other items, screenshots of text messages. Every piece of evidence was photographed and logged. When Olivia got to the part about the lake house invitation, Officer Martinez's expression hardened into something cold and determined. That's attempted luring of a minor, with intent to commit sexual assault. Combined with the gifts and the false identity, we've got grounds for multiple felonies: stalking, harassment, identity fraud, attempted sexual exploitation of a minor, and possibly attempted kidnapping depending on how we classify the lake house invitation. She looked at me with the kind of directness that cops develop after years of seeing terrible things. Do you know where Gerald Whitmore is right now? He works downtown, I said, pulling up my phone to find the address. Whitmore Security Solutions, 1500 Liberty Tower. He's the CEO, usually in his office between 9 and 6. Drives a silver Mercedes S-Class, license plate reads Secure One, lives in the Riverside Estates neighborhood, the big modern house on Maple Ridge Drive. Officer Martinez made a call to her sergeant, relaying all the information in clipped professional language. Within 5 minutes, she had a plan. Units were being dispatched to Gerald's office and his home address. A detective specializing in crimes against children was being called in. The district attorney's office was being notified. The machinery of law enforcement was spinning up, and I felt a savage satisfaction knowing Gerald had no idea what was about to hit him. Officer Thompson pulled me aside while Martinez continued talking with Olivia. Mr. Cross, I need to ask you some difficult questions about your relationship with Mr. Whitmore. Is there any history of conflict that might explain why he'd target your son's girlfriend? I told him everything. The divorce, the affair, the custody battle I'd won. Gerald's threats in this very office. His appearance at my workplace. The security footage my building had from that incident. The increasingly unhinged emails he'd sent my lawyer demanding I reconsider the settlement. The fact that he owned a security company with access to surveillance equipment and private investigators. Officer Thompson's expression got grimmer with each detail. So this is revenge. He's targeting this girl to hurt you, using his resources to surveil your family and gather information. That's premeditation. That helps our case significantly. It shows intent and planning, not just opportunistic predation. My phone rang. David Reyes, my lawyer. Nathan, what the hell is going on? I got your voicemail, and I'm already on my way to your house. Don't say anything else to police without me present. I explained that officers were already here taking Olivia's statement, that we were documenting everything, that Gerald had apparently been grooming a 16-year-old for months. David swore viciously. I warned you he was vindictive, but this? This is beyond anything I imagined. Okay, I'm 10 minutes away. Don't sign anything. Don't make any formal statements without me there to advise you. And Nathan, document everything, every text, every gift, every interaction. We're going to bury him with this. He arrived 8 minutes later, still wearing his suit from court, looking every inch the aggressive attorney who'd fought for me during the divorce. David immediately took control of the situation, introducing himself to the officers and reviewing everything that had been documented so far. 20 minutes after that, Detective Ramona Vasquez arrived. She was maybe 50, with gray-streaked dark hair pulled back severely and the kind of eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. She wore plain clothes, slacks, and a blazer, and carried herself with quiet authority. She introduced herself and immediately asked to speak with Olivia privately. David started to object, but Detective Vasquez raised a hand. I understand you're here as the family's attorney, but I need to conduct a forensic interview with the minor victim without adults who might inadvertently influence her testimony. This is standard procedure in child exploitation cases. It protects the integrity of her statement and ensures we can use it in court. David reluctantly agreed, and Olivia was taken to a separate room with Detective Vasquez and a female victim advocate who'd arrived shortly after. I was left in my living room with my lawyer, 2 patrol officers, and a growing sense of helplessness. David pulled me aside. "Tell me everything you know about Gerald's capabilities. You said he owns a security company. What kind of resources are we talking about?" "Everything," I said. "Whitmore Security Solutions does corporate security, executive protection, private investigation, surveillance installation. He has access to high-end equipment, a staff of former military and law enforcement, connections throughout the business community. He's wealthy, well-connected, and smart enough to cover his tracks. If he's been surveilling us, he's been doing it with professional-grade equipment." David's jaw tightened. "That's going to make this complicated but also more serious. If he used company resources to stalk a minor, that opens up corporate liability. We might be able to go after his business assets in addition to criminal charges." Caleb arrived home 45 minutes later, walking into a house full of police and lawyers with no context for what was happening. His soccer bag dropped from his shoulder when he saw the scene. "Dad?" His voice cracked. "What's going on? Where's Olivia? Is she okay?" "Sit down, son," I said, gesturing to the couch. "We need to talk." I explained everything as gently as I could, but there was no soft way to tell your teenage son that his grandfather wasn't actually his grandfather, that his ex-step-grandfather had been grooming his girlfriend for months, that every gift and kind word had been manipulation and predation. Watching Caleb's face as he processed the information was one of the hardest things I'd ever done as a father. He cycled through emotions faster than I could track. Confusion melted into disbelief, which hardened into horror, which collapsed into guilt. "But he was so nice to her," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "He'd give me money to take her on nice dates. He bought me new cleats when mine wore out. He came to my soccer games and cheered louder than anyone. He said he wanted to be part of my life even though Mom and you were divorced. He made me feel like I still had a grandfather who cared." My heart broke for my son. Gerald had manipulated Caleb just as thoroughly as he'd manipulated Olivia, just in different ways. He'd used Caleb's desire for family connection. His need for male role models after the divorce shattered his sense of family stability. Every gift, every soccer game attendance, every piece of advice had been part of a larger plan to gain access to Olivia. Caleb had been weaponized against his own girlfriend without knowing it. "He was grooming her," Officer Martinez said, not unkindly. "And he used you as the access point. This is not your fault. You're a kid who wanted a relationship with someone you thought was your grandfather. He exploited that completely normal desire. Predators are good at finding people's vulnerabilities and using them." Caleb looked at me with tears streaming down his face. I told him when she'd be home alone. I told him her work schedule. I gave him her phone number. "Dad, I helped him. I basically handed her to him on a silver platter." "You didn't know," I said firmly, sitting beside him and putting my arm around his shoulders. "You had no way of knowing. You thought you were sharing information with family. You thought you were including a grandfather in your life. Gerald is the one responsible for this, not you." But the guilt was already settling into Caleb's expression, and I knew we'd be dealing with the psychological aftermath of this for years. Detective Vasquez emerged from her interview with Olivia 2 hours after it had started. Her expression was even grimmer than when she'd arrived. Olivia was pale and exhausted, the victim advocate beside her looking equally drained. Detective Vasquez pulled me, David, and the officers aside while the advocate stayed with Olivia. "The situation is worse than initially reported," she said in a low voice. "Much worse." During the interview, Olivia disclosed additional details she hadn't felt comfortable sharing in front of Mr. Cross initially. Gerald has been progressively more physical with her over the past month, touching her hair, putting his hand on her lower back when walking, hugging her longer than appropriate. Last week he kissed her forehead and told her she was becoming a beautiful woman. My hands clenched into fists hard enough that my knuckles cracked. David put a restraining hand on my arm. "There's more," Detective Vasquez continued. "Olivia revealed that Gerald gave her a smartphone about 2 months ago, told her it was an early birthday present, top-of-the-line model. He set it up for her, installed all the apps, showed her how to use it. She's been using it as her primary phone since then. Her old phone broke, and her parents couldn't afford to replace it immediately." "Where's this phone now?" David asked sharply. "Olivia has it with her. We've secured it as evidence. Based on my experience, I'd bet everything I own that phone has tracking software installed, possibly spyware that gives him access to her messages, calls, location, even camera and microphone. We're sending it to our forensics team immediately." The room spun slightly. Gerald hadn't just been grooming Olivia face-to-face. He'd given her a compromised device that let him monitor her 24/7. He'd been reading her texts, tracking her location, possibly watching and listening through the camera and microphone. Every private moment she'd thought she had for the past 2 months had been observed. Every conversation, every vulnerable moment. "I'm going to be sick," I said, and barely made it to the bathroom before losing the contents of my stomach. When I came back, David was on the phone with someone, speaking in the clipped, aggressive tone he used when he was building a case. Detective Vasquez was coordinating with other officers, something about search warrants and forensic analysis. Officer Martinez was sitting with Caleb and Olivia, both teenagers looking shell-shocked and traumatized. We executed the warrants on Gerald's office and residence simultaneously at 6:47 p.m., 2 hours after Detective Vasquez's arrival. I watched the clock tick forward, imagining the scene. Officers walking into Whitmore Security Solutions executive suite. The receptionist's confusion. Gerald's face when he realized what was happening. The perp walk through his own company's lobby. His employees watching their CEO get arrested. I hoped it destroyed him. I hoped everyone saw. I hoped his reputation burned to ash. My phone started ringing at 7:15 p.m. Rebecca, my ex-wife. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. On the fourth attempt, David nodded at me to answer it, gesturing that he'd listen in. "What did you do?" Rebecca screamed before I could even say hello. "My father just got arrested at his office. They walked him out in handcuffs in front of everyone. His employees, his clients, everyone. This is your fault. You can't stand that I moved on, so you're trying to destroy my family. You need to call them and tell them this is a mistake." "Rebecca," I said, keeping my voice level through sheer force of will. "Your father has been stalking and grooming Caleb's 16-year-old girlfriend for 5 months. He's been giving her expensive gifts, tracking her movements, and planning to assault her. The police have evidence. This has nothing to do with you and me, and everything to do with him being a predator. You're lying." Her voice cracked with hysteria. "He would never. He's a grandfather. He loves children. He volunteers at the church. You're making this up to get back at me. Rebecca, the police have text messages, gifts, a phone he gave her with spyware installed, testimony from Olivia about inappropriate touching and attempts to lure her to an isolated location. This is real. Your father is not who you think he is." She was crying now, loud, gulping sobs. "You're destroying everything. My father is everything to me. He's all I have left after you took Caleb away. If you do this, if you go through with pressing charges, I'll never forgive you. I'll make sure Caleb knows you destroyed his family. I'm not pressing charges, Rebecca. The state is. Your father committed felonies against a minor. This is out of my hands now. And for the record, Caleb is sitting here listening to this conversation. He knows exactly what your father did." She hung up. Caleb looked at me with red, swollen eyes. "Mom really didn't know?" "I don't think so," I said honestly. "Your grandfather fooled everyone. That's what predators do. They're charming, respectable. They hide in plain sight." Detective Vasquez got a call at 8:30 p.m. and stepped outside to take it. When she came back, her expression was a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. We executed the search warrants. Gerald's home office had file folders on 7 different teenage girls, printed photos, social media posts screen captured, schedules written out by hand, personal information, names, addresses, phone numbers, school schedules, extracurricular activities, family situations, all girls between 14 and 17, all girls connected to men he had business or personal conflicts with. The room went silent as that information sank in. 7 girls, 7 families targeted for revenge or predation or some toxic combination of both. Olivia wasn't an isolated incident. She was part of a pattern, a systematic campaign of targeting vulnerable teenage girls connected to men Gerald viewed as enemies. Detective Vasquez continued. "We're contacting all the families now. Based on the documentation, at least 3 of these girls were approached similarly to Olivia. Gift-giving, false identity, grooming behavior. We're also pulling his company's surveillance records. Initial review shows he used Whitmore Security Solutions equipment and personnel to track these families. Company vehicles, company cameras, company tracking devices. He weaponized his entire business for this." David was already typing on his laptop, pulling up corporate law statutes. If he used company resources for criminal activity, the company itself can be held liable. We're talking massive civil exposure here. Every family affected can sue not just Gerald personally, but Whitmore Security Solutions. That company is finished. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I just felt sick. 7 families. 7 teenage girls who'd been stalked and assessed and targeted. 7 fathers who'd been too blind or too busy to notice what was happening. 7 mothers who'd probably sent their daughters out into the world thinking they were safe. How many other girls had Gerald done this to before now? How many victims were there that we didn't know about yet? Detective Vasquez's phone rang again. She listened, her expression darkening further. She hung up and looked directly at me. "Nathan, we found something else." Gerald's personal computer had a hidden partition with thousands of images, not just of Olivia and the other local girls. Images that appear to have been collected over years, possibly decades. Some are clearly downloaded from illegal sites. Others appear to be original photographs he took himself. We've contacted the FBI's Child Exploitation Task Force. This is bigger than a local case now. The federal government was getting involved. This wasn't just a vindictive ex-father-in-law targeting his ex-son-in-law's family. This was a predator who'd been operating for years, possibly decades, hiding behind wealth and respectability and community standing. How many lives had he destroyed? How many childhoods had he stolen? And I'd let my son spend time with him. I'd let Caleb go to his office, go to his house for visits after the divorce when Rebecca had insisted Caleb maintain a relationship with his grandfather. My son had been in the home of a predator, and I'd allowed it because I'd been trying to be reasonable, trying to co-parent effectively, trying not to alienate Caleb from his mother's family. Caleb seemed to read my thoughts. "Dad, you didn't know. None of us knew. He fooled everyone. But the guilt was there anyway, heavy and suffocating. A father's job is to protect his children, and I'd failed spectacularly. The hours blurred together after that. More officers arrived, FBI agents in dark suits with badges on their belts, social workers to check on Olivia's well-being and provide resources, a victims advocate coordinator who started making calls to the families of the other 6 girls Gerald had targeted. My house became a command center for a federal investigation, and all I could do was sit there and answer questions and watch my son fall apart piece by piece. Around midnight, Detective Vasquez finally said we could call it a night. Olivia's parents had been contacted and were on their way to pick her up. She'd been interviewed, examined, documented. Now she needed to go home and process everything with her family and the therapist who'd been arranged for her. Before she left, Olivia hugged Caleb for a long time. Neither of them said anything. What was there to say? Their relationship would never be the same. How could it be after this? "You saved my life," Olivia finally whispered to me as her parents arrived. "If I hadn't asked that question, if you hadn't believed me immediately." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I pulled her into a brief hug. "You saved yourself by trusting your instincts. I just helped you understand what they were telling you." After they left, Caleb went straight to his room, without a word. I heard him crying through the door but knew better than to intrude. Some processing had to happen alone, in the dark, where no one could see you fall apart. David stayed late, helping me organize all the documentation we'd provided to police. As he was leaving around 1 a.m., he turned to me in the doorway. "Nathan, I've been practicing law for 23 years. I thought I'd seen every kind of case. But this? This is going to be national news when it breaks. Major CEO of a security company using his own resources to stalk and groom teenage girls? The FBI getting involved? This is going to be huge." "I don't care about it being huge," I said tiredly. "I just want him in prison where he can't hurt anyone else." "You'll get that," David said confidently. "The evidence is overwhelming. What we need to think about now is protection for you and Caleb. Media attention, civil litigation from the other families, making sure Gerald doesn't have any assets left to hide or transfer. I'm filing emergency motions tomorrow morning to freeze all his accounts and put liens on his properties. The man is going to be destroyed financially, criminally, socially. Everything he built is coming down." "Good," I said, and meant it with a viciousness that surprised me. Let it all burn. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Caleb's doorway watching him finally rest after hours of crying, making sure he was still breathing, still safe, still here. I'd failed to protect him from Gerald's manipulation, but I wouldn't fail again. Whatever came next, whatever battles had to be fought, whatever demons had to be faced, we'd face them together. The story broke in the news 3 days later. Prominent CEO arrested in multi-state child exploitation case. The headlines were everywhere. Local news, national news, true crime blogs, Reddit threads. Gerald's photo was plastered across every platform, and the comments sections filled with thousands of people expressing shock that someone so respectable could be hiding such darkness. The investigation expanded rapidly. The FBI had found evidence connecting Gerald to an online network of predators who shared information, tactics, and images. His communications went back 15 years, showing a long history of targeting teenage girls. The other 6 families he'd been stalking in our area came forward with their own stories. Each one was similar to ours: teenage daughters of men Gerald had conflicts with, systematic approaches using false identities and expensive gifts, attempts to isolate the girls and create opportunities for assault. But Olivia was the only one who'd questioned what was happening soon enough to prevent physical assault. The others had been touched inappropriately. 1 had been assaulted. 2 had been photographed in compromising positions. The scope of Gerald's crimes was staggering. My phone never stopped ringing. Reporters wanting interviews. Lawyers from the other families wanting to coordinate civil suits. FBI agents with follow-up questions. Rebecca calling and screaming and crying and threatening, cycling through every emotion as she tried to process that her father was a monster. Caleb stopped going to school. The attention was too much. Students and teachers who'd seen Gerald at soccer games, who'd watched him play the doting grandfather, who'd had no idea what was really happening. The whispers and stares were unbearable. We arranged for home tutoring and online classes for the rest of the semester. Olivia's family moved to a different town entirely. Fresh start, new school, distance from the constant reminders. She texted Caleb once, saying goodbye, saying she'd always care about him but couldn't be his girlfriend anymore. The relationship was too tangled with trauma. He understood, but it destroyed him anyway. The preliminary hearing was 3 months after Gerald's arrest. The courtroom was packed with press, victims' families, law enforcement, and curiosity seekers. Gerald walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his expensive suits and confident bearing stripped away. He looked older, smaller, diminished. Our eyes met across the courtroom and I saw nothing there. No remorse, no shame, just cold calculation, like he was assessing whether I was still a threat or an obstacle to be managed. The prosecutor laid out the charges. 17 felony counts including stalking, attempted luring of minors, identity fraud, illegal surveillance, possession and distribution of child sexual abuse material, and using interstate commerce to facilitate the exploitation of minors. Each charge carried years of prison time. Gerald pled not guilty to everything. His lawyer, an expensive defense attorney from New York, started spinning narratives about misunderstandings and mental health issues and medication side effects. But the evidence was overwhelming and everyone in that courtroom knew it. The months crawled toward trial. Gerald remained in custody, denied bail as a flight risk and danger to the community. Whitmore Security Solutions collapsed. Clients fled. Employees quit. The board of directors dissolved the company rather than face the civil liability. Everything Gerald had built over 30 years vanished in a matter of weeks. Rebecca had a breakdown. Full psychiatric hospitalization. She couldn't reconcile the father she'd loved and admired with the monster the evidence showed him to be. Some part of her still believed it was all a conspiracy, a setup, a massive misunderstanding. But the images from his computer told a story no amount of denial could erase. Caleb started therapy 3 times a week. Dr. Patricia Lamont specialized in trauma and guilt in adolescence. She helped him understand that being manipulated doesn't make you responsible for the manipulator's actions. That trusting someone who presents themselves as trustworthy is normal, not foolish. That he'd been a child trying to maintain family connections in the aftermath of divorce, and that was healthy behavior twisted into something terrible by someone with sick intentions. The FBI's investigation expanded beyond Gerald. His online network led to arrests in 7 states. Dozens of men who'd been sharing images and tactics and information about teenage girls they were targeting. The bust made national news and was cited by child safety advocates as one of the most significant operations against online predators in years. Gerald's arrest had opened a door that exposed an entire underground network. The trial finally started 18 months after Gerald's arrest. I sat through every day of it, watching evidence get presented in excruciating detail. Photos, text messages, surveillance footage Gerald had compiled showing teenage girls going about their daily lives, unaware they were being watched. Expert testimony about grooming tactics and predatory behavior. Olivia had to testify. So did 3 of the other local girls. Watching them on the stand, describing in halting voices how Gerald had approached them, how he'd made them feel special and mature, how he'd slowly escalated physical contact, it was unbearable. Their parents sat in the gallery weeping. Their fathers looked like they wanted to leap over the barrier and strangle Gerald with their bare hands. I understood the feeling. Gerald's defense was that he'd been trying to mentor troubled girls from broken homes, that he'd been offering guidance and support, that his generosity had been misinterpreted, that the images on his computer had been planted by hackers trying to destroy his company. The defense attorney actually argued with a straight face that Gerald was the victim here, targeted by ex-family members and business rivals who'd fabricated evidence. The jury saw through it in minutes. The prosecutor brought in FBI forensic experts who proved the images on Gerald's computer had been there for years, that his online communications were genuine, that no hacking had occurred. She brought in the other men who'd been arrested from Gerald's network, several of whom had taken plea deals and were willing to testify about their communications with Gerald about targeting specific girls. The most damning evidence was Gerald's own voice. Recordings from his phone showed him talking to another predator about tactics. "Best approach is through the boyfriend," Gerald's voice said clearly. "Get close to the boyfriend first. Build trust there. Boys are easier to manipulate. They want male approval, especially from authority figures. Once you're established as a trusted adult, access to the girlfriend is simple." The recording had been made 4 years ago. Gerald had been refining these tactics for a long time. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all 17 counts. The courtroom erupted. Victims' families sobbing. Gerald sitting stone-faced. His lawyer already preparing appeals. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks later. I went home and found Caleb sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. "It's over," I told him. "He's guilty. Justice happened." Caleb nodded but didn't look relieved. "Justice doesn't fix what he broke, Dad. Those girls are still traumatized." Olivia moved away. "I can't stop feeling guilty every time I think about how I helped him." I sat beside my son. "You're right. Justice is just consequences, not healing. Healing is going to take a long time, but at least now we can start that process knowing he can't hurt anyone else." Sentencing day was packed. Every victim's family filled the gallery. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Patricia Hendricks, had a reputation for harsh sentences in child exploitation cases. Gerald was brought in looking defiant despite the guilty verdict. The prosecutor requested 45 years, essentially a life sentence for a man Gerald's age. The defense requested 15 with possibility of parole. Then came victim impact statements. 7 fathers stood and described what Gerald had done to their families, how their daughters had been traumatized, how trust had been shattered, how they'd failed to protect their children from a predator hiding behind respectability, how Gerald had weaponized their business conflicts and personal disputes by targeting the most vulnerable people in their lives. One father broke down completely. "My daughter tried to kill herself 6 months ago. She's 16 years old, and she tried to end her life because she couldn't live with the shame of what this man did to her. He made her think she was special, that what was happening was her choice, that she was mature enough to handle an adult relationship. And when she finally realized she'd been abused, the guilt almost killed her. That's on you, Gerald. You did that to my baby." The mother spoke too, described missed warning signs they'd been too busy to catch, gifts they'd thought were generous, comments they'd dismissed as friendly, changes in their daughter's behavior they'd attributed to normal teenage moodiness. We all failed our girls, one mother said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. But we failed because we trusted you. Because you presented yourself as safe. Because predators like you know how to hide. You exploited that trust, and you destroyed children. Olivia spoke last. She'd flown back specifically for this, standing at the podium with her parents beside her for support. I thought I was being mature by accepting your gifts. I thought I was sophisticated enough to handle an adult friendship. You made me feel special in a way that seemed genuine. She paused, taking a breath. It took me months to understand that what you did was abuse. That grooming isn't always violent or obvious. That predators can be charming and generous and patient. I have nightmares about what would have happened if I'd gone to that cabin. I have panic attacks when men are too friendly or too generous. I'm in therapy twice a week learning to trust my instincts again because you spent 5 months teaching me to ignore them. I'm 16 years old and I feel 100. That's what you took from me. Not my virginity or my innocence in the physical sense, but my ability to be a normal teenager who sees the world as safe. Judge Hendricks let the silence sit after Olivia finished. Then she looked directly at Gerald. Mr. Whitmore, you were given extraordinary advantages in life. Wealth, education, business success, social standing. You used every single one of those advantages to prey on children. You specifically targeted teenage girls connected to men you had conflicts with, treating these children as collateral damage in your petty vendettas. You used your company's resources to stalk and surveil minors. You maintained relationships with other predators online and shared tactics for grooming and exploiting children. You were not a grandfather figure trying to help troubled girls. You were a calculated predator who spent years refining your methods. The evidence shows systematic, deliberate targeting and grooming with the clear intent to sexually exploit minors. She paused, looking down at her notes. The prosecution has requested 45 years. I'm going to impose 55 years in federal prison, to run consecutively with any state charges that may be filed. You'll be eligible for parole when you're 117 years old. For all practical purposes, Mr. Whitmore, you'll die in prison. And that's exactly where you belong. The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge gavelled for order but didn't seem particularly bothered by the outburst. Gerald was led away, still stone-faced, refusing to show emotion. Rebecca wasn't at the sentencing. I heard later she'd moved to California, changed her name, cut off all contact with anyone who'd known her as Gerald Whitmore's daughter. The civil suits came next. 7 families suing Gerald's estate and Whitmore Security Solutions. The company's insurance fought for months, but eventually settled. $27 million divided among the victims' families. Money that would pay for years of therapy, relocation expenses, college funds, compensation for pain and suffering. It wouldn't heal the trauma, but it was tangible acknowledgement that real harm had been done and consequences mattered. Caleb graduated high school 2 years after Gerald's arrest. Small ceremony, homeschooled graduation, just family and close friends. He'd been accepted to 3 colleges, but deferred for a year. Needed time to process everything before jumping into the social pressures of university life. I supported his decision completely. We spent that year traveling together, father-son trips to places neither of us had been, building new memories untainted by Gerald's shadow, hiking in national parks, visiting museums, long drives with no destination where we'd talk about everything and nothing. Slowly, Caleb started to heal. Not completely, trauma doesn't work that way, but enough to function. Enough to trust again. Enough to believe he had worth beyond being a useful pawn in someone else's game. He started college the following fall, majoring in social work with a focus on youth protection. He wanted to work with at-risk teenagers, help them recognize grooming and manipulation, give them tools to protect themselves that he wished he'd had. I ran into Olivia completely by accident 4 years after everything happened. Coffee shop in a city 3 hours from where we'd lived. She was in college, studying psychology, looked healthy and confident in a way I'd wondered if she'd ever achieve again. "Mr. Cross," she said, and the surprise in her voice was genuine. "How are you?" We sat and talked for an hour. She'd been in intensive therapy for 2 years, worked through most of the trauma, still had hard days but was managing. She was dating someone new, someone who knew her history and didn't treat her as broken. She'd reconnected with Caleb online, kept tabs on each other as friends from a distance, both understanding that some relationships are too tangled with pain to resurrect, but still caring about each other's well-being. I asked her about the question, the one she'd asked that day in my office about the grandfather who wasn't really a grandfather. "Do you ever regret asking it? Do you wish you'd never known?" She thought about it for a long moment. If I hadn't asked, I would have gone to that cabin eventually. I was getting close to saying yes. Another week, maybe 2, and I would have convinced myself it was okay. So no, I don't regret it. The knowing was horrible, but not knowing would have been worse, would have been dangerous. Sometimes the truth destroys you a little bit, so that something worse doesn't destroy you completely. 5 years after Gerald's conviction, I got a letter from him. Prison mail, forwarded through my lawyer who called to warn me before I opened it. "You don't have to read this. You don't owe him anything." "I know," I said, "but I need to see what he has to say." The letter was typed, not handwritten. 2 pages. No apology. No acknowledgement of guilt. Just justifications and rationalizations. He'd been misunderstood. The evidence had been manipulated. His attorneys had failed him. The jury had been biased. The judge had been unfair. He was the real victim, persecuted for trying to help troubled girls from broken homes. Reading it, I realized Gerald would die never accepting responsibility. Some predators were like that, so convinced of their own righteousness or so lacking in empathy that they genuinely couldn't comprehend the harm they'd caused. He'd sit in prison for decades blaming everyone but himself. I burned the letter, didn't respond, didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing his words had reached me. He was irrelevant now, a monster in a cage who'd lost his power to hurt anyone. Caleb graduated college with honors, got a job at a non-profit organization working with foster children and abused teenagers. Watching him with these kids, gentle, patient, understanding in ways only trauma can teach, I saw how he'd transformed his pain into purpose. He'd taken what Gerald did and used it to become someone who protected rather than predated. Rebecca reached out 7 years after the trial. Email from an address I didn't recognize. Simple subject line. I'm sorry. The message was short. I've been in therapy for years now, working through denial and guilt and my own role in enabling my father. I know I screamed at you that day, blamed you for his arrest. I know I defended him long after the evidence was clear. I was wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just saying I see it now. I see what he was and what he did and how many people he hurt. I'm sorry I didn't believe the victims. I'm sorry I made it harder for Caleb. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't respond immediately. Took me 3 weeks to figure out what to say. Eventually settled on, thank you for saying that. I hope you've found peace. Rebecca didn't reply, and I never heard from her again. Some apologies are just about the person giving them, not the person receiving them. She needed to say it. I needed to acknowledge it. That was enough. 10 years after Olivia asked her question, I was at a conference about child safety and digital exploitation. Panel of experts, law enforcement, advocacy groups, survivors. One of the speakers was Olivia. She'd finished her doctorate in psychology and now ran a program teaching teenagers how to recognize grooming behaviors. Her presentation was powerful, clinical, but personal, drawing on her own experience without making it the center of attention. Afterward, people surrounded her with questions, praise, gratitude. I waited until the crowd cleared. Dr. Marsh now, I said, reading her name tag. Congratulations. She smiled, older and wiser and carrying her scars with grace. Mr. Cross, I heard Caleb's doing amazing work with youth services. You must be proud. Every day, I said. You both turned something terrible into something meaningful. That's real strength. She looked thoughtful. You know what I think about sometimes? If I'd never asked that question. If I'd just accepted the gifts and ignored my discomfort. How different everything would have been. Worse, I said. Unquestionably worse. She nodded. That's what I tell the teenagers I work with now. Your discomfort is information. Your instincts are trying to protect you. When something feels wrong, it usually is wrong. Don't ignore those feelings because you're worried about being rude or ungrateful. Being safe is more important than being polite. We talked for a while longer, two people connected by trauma, but no longer defined by it. She'd built a life that mattered. So had Caleb. So had I. Gerald had tried to destroy us and failed. That was the real victory. 15 years after Gerald's arrest, he died in prison. Heart attack at 76 years old. My lawyer called to inform me, asked if I wanted to make any statement. I said no. His death was as irrelevant as his life had become. He'd spent 15 years in a cell contemplating his choices, or more likely, stewing in resentment about being caught. Either way, he was gone now, and the world was safer for it. The families he'd victimized were notified. Some felt relief. Some felt nothing. A few felt cheated that he hadn't lived longer to suffer more. Everyone processed it differently, but we were all united in one truth. He'd never hurt another child. That was enough. Caleb was married by then, to someone who knew his history and loved him anyway. They were talking about starting a family, and Caleb asked me once if I thought the trauma would affect his parenting. I told him the awareness would make him better, not worse. He'd protect his children because he understood how vulnerable they were. He'd teach them to trust their instincts because he'd learned what happens when you don't. He'd be the father I'd tried to be, but with the hard-earned wisdom that trauma sometimes provides. Olivia sent a brief text when she heard about Gerald's death. One chapter finally closed. Time to keep writing better ones. That became my philosophy too. Gerald had written himself into our story as a villain, but he didn't get to write the ending. We did that ourselves. Every day we chose healing over bitterness. Every time Caleb helped a kid recognize manipulation. Every time Olivia taught a teenager to trust their instincts. Every time I looked at my son and saw strength instead of just scars. Those were the endings we wrote, and they were so much better than anything Gerald could have imagined. 20 years after the question that changed everything, I was sitting on my porch watching grandchildren play in the yard. Caleb's kids, too young to understand the full story, but growing up in a house where safety and boundaries and instincts were valued above politeness. Where no adult was automatically trusted just because they were family or successful or charming. Where questions were encouraged and discomfort was respected. One of them, My granddaughter, Emma, came running up with a flower she'd picked. "Grandpa, why do some people do bad things?" Out of nowhere, the kind of question kids ask that has no simple answer. "Because sometimes people are broken inside in ways that make them want to hurt others," I said. "But there are more good people than bad people, and the good people work very hard to protect everyone else." She nodded, satisfied with that answer, and ran back to play. Caleb sat down beside me. "She asks a lot of questions." "Just like someone else I know," I said. "Someone who asked the right question at exactly the right time and saved herself and others." Caleb smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way it hadn't for years after Gerald. "You know what I tell my clients now?" "What?" "That the bravest thing you can do is ask for help when something feels wrong. That questions are power. That no one should ever make you feel bad for trusting your instincts." "Sounds like you learned that from someone smart," I said. "I learned it from a 16-year-old girl who was braver than she knew," he replied. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching children play in safety, knowing that the question Olivia asked 20 years ago had rippled forward through time. It had saved her. It had exposed a predator. It had led to the dismantling of a network that hurt children. It had taught us all that vigilance and instinct matter, that questions should be answered honestly, that discomfort is information, that evil hides in plain sight, but light always finds it eventually. One question. Why does your grandpa keep buying me expensive gifts when you're not around? That's all it took to bring down a monster, save countless lives, and teach us that the most powerful thing we can do is pay attention and refuse to ignore what we see. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.